Great. Welcome back once again to another one of our behavior chats. Super excited today because we're going to go over one of my favorite teaching methods, which is called non-contingent teaching. I'm going to cause everybody a big headache because you're going to go and look for non-contingent teaching. You won't find it anywhere because that's a term I coined for the teaching that we've kind of discovered while I was working with kids, and so that's kind of our own kind of methodology, and we haven't published on it at all. Yeah. Now, in ABA then, and why we do this work is that there's specific research that tells us that, with a certain level of intensity of treatment for certain number of young kids, we can help them achieve what is considered typical functioning. And so at the bottom of the slide is some of the research papers that go into outcome research, which is, where the kids started, where they ended up, and that's when we talk about outcome, we're talking about the results of that research helping kids achieve typical functioning. Now, all of this research is based on three things, right? Applied behavior analysis, early intensive behavior intervention, and discrete trial teaching. There's a lot of styles of ABA or methods of teaching within ABA. There's things called natural environment teaching, pivotal response training, verbal behavior, the Early Start Denver model. And all of these have research supporting that they are helpful for kids. But the problem is none of these have research that says, if you apply this number of hours over this amount of time, this percentage of kids will achieve typical functioning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what early intensive behavior intervention means. So when they talk about early, they're talking about very young kids. So all early intensive behavior intervention is looking at starting kids at the youngest age possible, and that's usually before they hit 4 years of age. It's considered intensive when it ranges anywhere from 25 to 40 hours per week of treatment. And it's behavior intervention because it uses ABA to transform a child's behaviors, and DTT to teach specific skill sets. All right, so kids start early, and there's a lot of different reasons for why that is of incredible benefit. So the younger you are, the more malleable your brain is, so the younger you go, the more adaptable you are. The older that you get, your brain gets set in a particular way, and it's more challenging to change that as you get older and older. They also have less of a history of maladaptive behaviors, So when you're talking about like a 2-year-old, the variety, the severity, everything that includes into their maladaptive, protest, aggressive behaviors pales in comparison to a 5-year-old, and a 5-year-old pales into comparison to a 9-year-old. When you're dealing with a 9-year-old, you're dealing with a long history of engaging in these behaviors, and therefore they become more entrenched and more challenging to eliminate. The younger they are, the easier they are to manage, So when you're dealing with a 2-year-old, the worst they can do is not that bad. When they try to run away from you, it's easy to get them. It's different when they're 5, it's different when they're 9, it's different when they're 15, okay? It's so much easier to handle a small young child. Now, one thing I didn't list here is that also without treatment, our kids get worse and worse as they get older, meaning like the difference between them and other kids grows as they get older and older, you know? So the younger that you start, the gap is less between them and their peers. As they get older, the gap gets wider and wider, and it takes a lot more to close that gap. All right, intensive, like I was saying, it was 25 to 40 hours is considered intensive treatment. And remember, this is early, so we're giving up to 40 hours to kids under the age of 4. And so most people react like, oh my God, that's so many hours. Like, wow. And there's always this kind of shock factor associated with the high number of hours associated with the early intensive behavior intervention model. So when you take a look at the original research, okay, and the hours that they were doing on average 40 hours a week, which means that some weeks were a little bit less and other weeks were a little bit more, but on average they were doing about 40 hours a week. The whole idea, as the researchers are talking about, is that we're providing treatment when the child starts with us, and that treatment, there's no break from it. There's no stop to the treatment. Once we start treatment, treatment is ongoing throughout the child's day, throughout their week, throughout the year, throughout the next couple of years. There is no break from the treatment. So the child should be receiving treatment from the moment that they wake up all throughout the day until they go to sleep. So how is this possible? Because, you know, like 40 hours doesn't cover every waking moment of the child's day necessarily. So a big component is parents and parent involvement in the treatment design, in the treatment application, because without parents being there, being supportive and carrying the treatment outside of treatment hours, the treatment's not going to be as successful. And I can't say this enough. Parents are really the most important part of our treatment programs because they help us in the times when we don't provide treatment. And the smaller of a gap, the less difference that the child recognizes from when treatment is occurring to when they're at home with parents, the better the success the treatment's going to have. All right? The model always starts at home first, okay? So all treatment starts at home, and then when we teach skills, those skills are taught at home and then generalized to their community or outside of their home. Now, the reason why this is that one, at home, you have the most control over a lot of different factors, okay? When you go out into the community, you can't control how other people are going to react to your child. You can't control a whole range of factors, you know? But at home, there's a lot of things that you can absolutely control that's going to help facilitate your child's progress. The thing is that your child is going to spend most of their time at home also, which means that the skills that they're going to learn through a program are going to be the most easily transferred from that program into the same environment in which you're teaching it. When we take a look at starting in the home and then generalizing out into the community, what we're really talking about is they're going to need to produce a lot of skills at home, and teaching it at home facilitates that. And then once they learn it at home, it gets easier to transfer those skills outside of the home. That's why for us, in our experience, center-based services are not very effective. Why? You're dropping your child off at a center. They might learn some skills there. They might even tell you, oh, they're able to do this, do that. And when they come home, they don't demonstrate any of those skills at all. Why? Because they're used to producing it in an environment that's not at home. All right, so the behavior intervention is about gaining the child's compliance. What you find is your child won't listen to you for anything, and the most important thing is to get them to listen to you, because if they don't listen to you, there's no way you can teach them. And so all of our kids struggle with listening to us and engaging in a wide variety of behaviors that are going to inhibit, make their learning a lot more difficult. So in general, what you're trying to do is always promote appropriate pro-social behaviors. And then you're trying to extinguish or punish or get rid of any problematic behaviors that the child demonstrates that actually interferes with the quality of their life. Early intensive behavior intervention is comprehensive, okay? It teaches whatever the child needs to know, we're gonna teach them. It doesn't matter if it's about self-help, it doesn't matter if it's play, it's whatever the child is struggling with or doesn't know and they need to learn, it gets tackled in early intensive behavior intervention. Now we're gonna talk a little bit about discrete trial, because the discrete trial is how they taught the skills in all those research studies. And what you have to understand, DTT is a specific implementation of teaching under applied behavior analysis. Now, there's something else called Errorless Teaching, and we have gone over that in previous talks here. But just to remind everybody what Errorless Teaching is. So Errorless Teaching is the prompting strategy that says, I'm not going to allow you to make a mistake. So from the very beginning of teaching you, I'm going to use the highest level of prompting that's going to be successful for you. And then as you gain independence with that particular skill, that's when I'll fade out the level of assistance given to you. So Errorless Teaching, the whole strategy here is to make sure the child's successful and to minimize any errors that they encounter. All right, so the thing to understand about Errorless Teaching is that it's about having the child practice skill sets using the right technique, because when you use the right technique and you get the right results and you do the right things each and every time that you practice it, well, good practice makes everything perfect. The thing is, the more that you fail, the more errors that you make, it discourages your learning. And also in general, errors slow down the learning process. Why? Because you're not making the right connections. You're not building in the right muscle memory. You're not making the right connections, that every error that you make, you're off course, and then you have to find your way back on course. But every time you divert away, it slows down your learning process. All right, let's talk about discrete trial teaching then, okay? Now we have a whole lecture based completely on discrete trial teaching. So I'm just gonna go over the basics of it, and we won't, we'll just kind of go over it really quickly here. So DTT is a demand-based teaching methodology, okay? And it's demand-based because I'm telling you what to do. I expect you to do it. And then there are consequences if you do it, and there are consequences if you don't. Difficult skills are broken down and broken down and broken down into the easiest, most basic to learn components. And when you start a DTT program, generally what you're trying to do is really gain the child's compliance with very easy tasks that you know that they're able to do, but they won't do it when you tell them to do it. And so the whole idea is that you have to get the child compliant, because it doesn't matter if they have 10,000 skills, because if you ask them to do any one of those skills, most of the time they'll refuse to do it. And then when the child learns these more basic skills, it increases the level of difficulty. We add more and more in, making the skill more and more complex until we can get to the level where they can use this skill in their everyday lives. All right, so in DTT, then, language is very, very systematically taught. So when you start with kids that don't have any language, the first step is to get them to just say any sound, and get them to say it a lot of the time. Then as the child is able to produce more and more sounds, then you're trying to get them to understand when you tell them to copy me or say this, that they can produce a sound for you, any sound, when you say a sound. Once they're good at understanding how to copy any sound that you make with any sound, then you have to be more selective and teach them how to imitate a specific sound. So when I say ah, you're going to copy ah. When I say e, you're going to say e. And then we just get more complex. So as they're able to imitate sounds, then we're going to try to get them to imitate words. When they can imitate words, we're going to try to get them to imitate phrases. When they can imitate phrases, we're going to get them to imitate entire sentences. And every aspect of language is taught, from very concrete items like objects and color, shapes, actions, to much more abstract language. Now, remember that there are two types of language, right? There's receptive language and expressive language. Receptive language is the understanding of language, while expressive language is the production, the creation of language. So in our programming, when you have a receptive program, it's targeting receptive language, which is the understanding of language. And expressive programs target expressive language, which is we're expecting the child to say something, to respond vocally to something that we're asking them. And in general, we teach a program receptively, and then after they've learned it receptively, then we teach it expressively. So the job is, I need you to understand the language first. Okay, so when I say touch blue or touch object, or I can say touch running or whatever, you can show me you understand that language before I can expect you to say it. In discrete child teaching, we're teaching one item at a time. We're introducing something. Say, I'm teaching you water bottle. So I'm going to teach you water bottle until you've learned it, what this is. And we know you know this item when I can ask you for other things that we've taught you in the same area, and you can still respond correctly to all those items. So once you learn this, then I can teach you something new. And then what we do is we practice all of the things that you learned in a sitting in order to make sure that you remember it and distinguish it from other things, that you're not making anything, you don't have any confusion with other items. So when we practice all of these skills that we've already taught the child, we call that a mastered item sitting. And in general, skills that we're teaching are practiced multiple times a day to give the child enough practice to effectively learn what we have to teach them. And learned skills are generally practiced less and less often over time as the child demonstrates that they're able to remember that item with less and less practice. All right, woo! That was a long history, and finally we get to non-contingent teaching. All right, so non-contingent teaching is based off of a different principle in ABA than DTT. And so non-contingent is really based on learning through making associations in our environment. And this is called classical conditioning. And DTT is driven by operant conditioning, which is how we learn from the consequences of our actions. So in DTT, it's a demand-based teaching, which is I'm telling you what to do, I expect you to do it, and then you're either getting an informational no when you don't do it the way I want, or you're being reinforced for doing what I want. So in DTT, it's really the consequences that are driving the child's learning. All right, so to give everyone kind of like a brief history of like how did non-contingent teaching come about, this is our story. So I was working with a child, and he was learning object labels, which is like, oh, you know, this is a water bottle, this is a letter. So he's learning object labels, and we're using discrete child teaching to teach him these things receptively first, and then expressively after he's learned it receptively. And he was learning things at a very modest to lower rate, you know? So to learn something receptively, it would take him 2 to 3 weeks, and then take him a little bit longer to learn that same item expressively. So all we're looking to do is like, is there any way that we can help this child learn these things faster? So what we decided to do is we decided like, okay, what are the next 10 things that we want this child to learn? And why don't we just expose it to him every hour? And so that's what we did is, every hour we got the 10 items that we were going to have him learn next, and just show it to him and tell him what it is. Remember, we're just like, please let it help this child learn things faster. What we did not expect was the child to learn all 10 objects in about a couple of weeks. And he learned it both receptively and expressively. So that blew our minds because we did not expect such an incredible response to this exposure process. And this is where non-contingent teaching was born. Okay. So after exploring non-contingent teaching and doing a lot of different like experimenting and that kind of thing, this is what we found from our years and years of experience. Now, what we found is like, in discrete child teaching, we teach one item at a time. For non-contingent teaching, 10 just seemed to be like the right number for us to use to teach at any point in time. It just seemed like, okay, it's enough to expose the child to, and it's not too much to inundate them with. All right, now in DTT, you're just gonna sit in front of the child, and what you're going to do is hold the item that you want to expose the child to, and you just wait until they look at it. Once they look at it, then you tell them the item that you're holding up. So once they look at it, it's like water bottle. Then you hold up another item that you're teaching them. You wait until they look at that item, and then you say the item again. So I hold it up, scissors. Now, when we do this, we practice it frequently. But when you only have 10 items and you're just sitting the child down, you can run through those 10 items really, really quickly. And so most of the time when we have treatment with our kids, any of these non-contingent programs that we have, we're running at least one time an hour. Now, what happens that we found in the process is that as we start to expose the child to all of these items, they'll start to imitate some of these items. Even though we've never asked them to actually imitate, they'll start to try to imitate. So if I go like this and they look at it like pen, they might say, or they'll try to copy the model I gave them. Then the child gets better and better about imitating until sometimes they'll try to jump ahead of you. So as soon as you kind of put the pen up, they'll say pen before you even have a chance to say it. So when the child gets really good with the articulation and the imitation of the item, then therapists, what they do is they deliberately wait to see if the child will just label it without us modeling it for them. Now, the funny thing is that this is our method of teaching all of these skills, right? But it always ends in discrete child teaching. Right? So we use DTT to check that the child actually has learned items through non-contingent teaching. What we do is, oh, you're able to just say this. Now we're going to make sure, can you say it under demand conditions? So I'm going to hold it up and say, what is it? And if you can say pen, okay, you know it. And if I have the pen with other items and I say touch pen, and you can show me you know what the pen is, all right, now you've actually learned it. Because the thing is, it doesn't matter how much your child knows, because it's useless. It's a useless skill if they can never do it when you ask them to do it. All right, so here's some videos just showing you an example of how it's run. And thanks to the moms again for sharing. I think it helps everyone better understand it when viewing it.
구급차, 연필, 단추, 공책, 텔레비전, 구슬, 냉장고, 다리미, 에어컨. 잘했어.
설거지하고 요리하는 거야.
설거지하고 요리하는 거야.
옷 가리는 거야.
옷 다리는 거야.
음식 찍어 먹는 거야.
음식 찍어 먹는 거야.
음식 떠 먹는 거야.
음식 떠 먹는 거야.
전화하고 받는 거야.
전화하고 받는 거야.
연필과 지우개를
연필이나 지우개는
넣을 때 쓰는 거야.
넣을 때 쓰는 거야.
울면서 타는 거야.
울면서 떠는 거야.
길이를 재고
길이를 재고
선 그을 때
처음 그을 때
쓰는 거야.
쓰는 거야.
높은 곳에
높은 곳에
올라갈 때
올라갈 때
쓰는 거야.
쓰는 거야.
공부할 때
공부할 때
분필로
공부로
글씨 쓰는 거야.
글씨 쓰는 거야.
엄마가 설거지해요.
엄마가 설거지해요.
크게 말하세요. 친구들이 축하해요.
친구들이 축하해요.
크게.
친구들이 축하해요.
그렇지. 선생님이 가르쳐요.
선생님이 가르쳐요.
그렇지. 잘했어. 자, 이번엔 지호 차례야.
친구가
응.
고기를 냄새를 맡아요.
그렇지. 잘했어요. 설명해봐요.
친구가
응.
고기를 뜯고 먹어요.
먹지는 않았어요.
과자를 뜯어서 먹어요.
아니, 주야 먹어 안 먹어 지금?
안 먹어요.
안 먹었잖아. 그냥 지금 뭐 하고 있는 거야?
뜯어요.
그렇죠. 다시 설명해 보세요.
친구가 고기를 뜯어요.
잘했어요. 설명해 보세요. 목소리.
친구가
목소리 크게.
친구가 옷을 입어요.
잘했어요. 화이팅!
여자 친구가 커플을 끼어요.
잘했어.
아빠가 골아요.
잘했어.
남자 친구가 부적을 넣어요.
잘했어.
누나가 문
천천히 얘기해. 시작.
누나가 문을 닫아요.
잘했어.
약속해요.
잘했어. 약속해요.
누나가 곁에 계세요.
다시 얘기해봐. 크게.
누나가 곁에 계세요.
잘했어.
친구가
다시. 다시. 혓바닥 어떻게 그랬어? 다시. 서. 다시. 그렇지. 다시 얘기하세요.
친구가
친. 다시. 서. 다시. 서. 잘했어.
누가 마태치를 구부러요.
잘했어.
여자 친구가 기타리로 치어요.
잘했어.
저 아까
크게 얘기해. 다시. 다시 얘기하세요.
저 아까 의가에서 일어나요.
잘했어.
All right. So hopefully those videos were helpful in showing you what non-contingent teaching looks like. There's actually a lot more stuff to non-contingent. I just couldn't fit it in on one day. So that's why I labeled it part 1, and part 2 will be to come. Just because we think this is a fantastic method of teaching and we found it incredibly useful in every possible way, you know? And so, you know, come back at some point here to part 2, and hopefully like some of the movies, part 2 will be better than part 1 because part 1 had a lot of filler to kind of catch you up to our main character. Thanks everyone for joining us again. We really appreciate it. Please hit the like button, tell your friends about us, tell them to subscribe to our channel. We would really appreciate that. Any feedback that you have to give us, please feel free to give it, good, bad, anything. We'd like to know about it. You know, some things we can change and some things we can't, some things we're trying to improve on, but the feedback is always appreciated. Well, we'll see everybody next time. Thanks again for joining us. Bye-bye.